and welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I welcome to the show entrepreneur, strategist, and CEO of the Texas Public Charter Schools Association, Starlee Coleman. Ms. Coleman,
Hi.
how are you?
Thank you. I'm great. How are you today?
I'm doing good, doing real good. I'm excited to talk to you. I think charter schools is one of those things that I think I know a lot about, and then when I start thinking about it, I realize there's not a whole lot. I actually don't know that much about it. So I'm excited to talk to you. I think it's exciting. So let's start with just real basic. What does the Texas Public Charter Schools Association do?
So, we are an advocacy organization dedicated to protecting the foundation, the policy foundation that supports charter schools. Charter schools are public schools that have to meet many of the same requirements as a traditional school district school has to meet. But we are guaranteed some autonomy and flexibility in the law. And our job is to protect that, to make sure that creative entrepreneurs, people who have interesting ideas for schools continue to have the freedom and flexibility to create interesting learning environments for students.
So, okay. Just based on that answer, I'm starting to picture in my head, charter schools. I know what public schools are like. I've been in public schools. My children go to public schools right now. They've been to private schools. So I get that sort of difference. But charter kind of seems like maybe it falls in the middle somewhere, right? It's still a public school. So do y'all still have to, I don't know, are there still state standards that you'll have to meet?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the easiest way to think about charter schools, I think, for people who are not super familiar. We are public schools in every sense of the word. We are free. We are open to any student who wants to enroll. And we follow all of the same sort of accountability and good government standards that school district schools have to follow. So they have to meet the same state standards. They take the same state tests. They have to meet the same graduation requirements. All of that stuff is the same. There's really two main differences for charter schools. One is, we've all heard of magnet schools, right? Where kids can go, take a test and go to the school in the school district that focuses on like math and science or
Yeah.
whatever. So charter schools are allowed to have a specific and unique mission for their particular school. But the one difference between a charter school and a magnet school in that respect is kids cannot be required to take a test. There are no admission standards allowed for charter schools. So think about a mission-driven school. So for example, a math and science school or a classical school. Many families are looking for classical education these days. A Montessori school or a Waldorf school, something that could be like really specific, a specific type or approach to education. Charter schools are allowed to have those specific missions. And then the other main difference, and this is like really the big difference for charter schools, is that in Texas, all charter schools are nonprofit organizations. And so the board that manages the charter school in Texas is a nonprofit board of directors. So everyone knows, people run for school board, right? For a charter school, you don't run for school board. You are selected to be based on the expertise that you bring to the table to be part of a nonprofit board of directors. Now, there's a lot of confusion about how charter school boards are held accountable, and I'm happy to talk about that because it's a long, long, long list of ways that they're held accountable, but they're not elected by the public, and that's the main difference for charters.
So I do want to ask you that question, about accountability, but first I want to ask, are charter schools, I'm trying to imagine like an entrepreneur wants to start a school, and they have a great idea about education. Maybe it's an outdoor school, right? A nature school, and they think that kids should spend, they have a child and they think, man, my child's not getting enough, outdoor time, not enough physical education. It's only once or twice a week that they're in PE. I think that should be for 2 hours every day. And maybe there's some other parents that think the same way. So they start this school and they do that and they implement that. That's their mission, is a lot of, physical activity along with maybe the classics. And they start this and they get money from the state is it the same way that public schools work? That per student they get a part of that recapture money?
So charter schools are funded entirely based on the number of kids who are in the building. They
Okay.
do not get any property tax money and like any of the money that, your property taxes goes into this sort of big kitty to support public schools, and charters don't get any of that. So all of our money in Texas comes directly from the state that the state legislature appropriates to charter schools.
Okay. That's interesting. So the funding mechanism is different, but the charter school does get funding per student. So the charter school, I feel like I see a lot of people say that charter schools can sort of pick and choose who they want to come to their school, almost as if it's a private school. Um,
Yeah, that's
but
not true.
that's not true, and it turns out that the charter schools are actually incentivized to increase their enrollment.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. And the way there's a lot here. So let me talk about what you said
Sure.
about the sort of school that you envisioned. First of all, I would sign my kid up for that school.
This was a purely hypothetical. It's not my own idea. I promise.
Okay, well, if you start that school, you call me because I'm signing up. It is incredibly hard in Texas to start a charter school from scratch. It's very difficult. We have the most rigorous charter school approval process in the entire country,
Okay.
which is good. It's a good thing. It is a big responsibility to start a public school. And that's what you're starting when you're starting a charter school. You are starting a public school. You are going to receive taxpayer resources, and you should be ready to be accountable for that. And you should be ready to teach children, right? The point of charter schools is to put more options on the table for parents to make sure that their kids are in the learning environment that is right for them. And a huge part of that is to make sure that kids are reading and writing and doing math and understanding science on grade level. And charters have the same requirements about that stuff that regular public schools do too. But they have the added benefit of, as you said, being able to be outside for 2 hours a day if that's the mission of the school. I think kids should be outside for more than that. In fact, probably more around like 3 or 4, especially littles. They need. There's all kinds of research about the benefits of being outside in
Yeah.
nature and how it helps reinforce all of the concepts that they learn in the classroom. So anyway, that's a topic for another day. If you haven't had the woman who started the 1,000 hours outside challenge on your podcast, you should reach out to her. She's amazing. Yeah.
1,000 hours outside.
1,000 hours outside, and it is a challenge that families can choose to do, where you're basically, the goal is to, she calls it matching screen time with green time, and it's there's tons of research that goes into how important it is for little kids to be outside.
Is that
Anyway,
1,000 hours per year?
yeah, so that roughs out to about 3 hours a day, which is a lot.
That is a lot. Wow. I was going
Yeah,
to say maybe my oldest son actually gets that. I mean, when he was younger, he probably did. I don't think he does now, but
yeah,
okay. Well,
yeah.
challenge accepted.
Yes.
I'll
Okay.
look
So you
into
reach
it.
out to Ginny Yurt. That'd be a fun show for you. She's great. Um, all right, back to charter schools. So the funding mechanism for all schools in Texas is the state legislature sets a dollar amount basically that they send to every charter school and ISD school in the state. That's a sort of like a per pupil, like this kid shows up at your school and you're going to get this amount of money. And then on top of that, of course, ISDs can levy property taxes. And so they get additional funding that doesn't come through the state, that just comes through your property tax bill directly into ISDs. So one of the things that we hear a lot is the sort of confusion about how charter schools are funded, and whether or not we also hear a lot like, oh well, charter schools look good on paper, and of course their results look really good because they get to pick who they want to serve. And in that, first of all, that's not true. As I mentioned, they're open to any kid who wants to come. And if more students want to enroll than the school has space to serve, the school has a random lottery to determine who gets to come to the school. And in Texas, overwhelmingly, the students who are being served by charter schools are from low income and traditionally underserved backgrounds. And the majority of charter schools in Texas are actually located in those kind of historically and traditionally underserved communities. So, this is not this is not private school light in Texas. I mean, this is really an effort to make sure that children who have been historically underserved are finally getting the public school education that they deserve. That does not mean, of course, that other families are not looking at charter schools. They
Sure.
are, in fact, one of the state publishes a wait list number every year to let people know how many families are. I mentioned that if there are more kids that want to enroll than space, schools have a lottery.
Yeah.
So that means that there are kids who don't get in to the schools that they want to go to. So they are on a waiting list. And the school in Texas that has the single longest waiting list of all charter schools in the state, there's about 2,500 kids on the waiting list for one particular campus. And it's in Round Rock. It's called Meridian World School. And it's an international baccalaureate focused school. So very high academic standards, open to any kid, right? So this is in a suburban community where families have access to an otherwise very good school district, but they just want something a little different for their kid, right? Something that will push them a little farther, or culturally is a little bit different than what they might experience in their assigned school. And there is, we see that across the state, in all parts of the state, in urban communities, suburban communities, even rural communities. There are charter schools increasingly serving higher numbers of kids. And as enrollment grows, we are also seeing that demand, and the wait list for charter schools is also growing at the same time.
Yeah. So, you brought up underserved, generally, historically more underserved communities going into charter schools. And I get the impression that that is maybe the majority of charter school students or the plurality. I don't know. I'm not sure. Is
Yeah,
that the case?
yeah, that's right. When you look at charter school enrollment overall in Texas, about 80% of the students are Black or Latino and from low-income families, right? So this charter schools are filling a gap that I think we all have to acknowledge is real
Yeah.
um, for low-income communities. We voters, taxpayers, adults have allowed school systems to fail low income communities for a long time, and it is wrong. And charter schools are a way in those communities for community leaders, civic organizations to come into a community and say, okay, we are going to bring a school where the adults will be held accountable for making sure that children are safe and learning every day.
So you brought up accountability, which is a great segue. I was planning on getting back to that anyway. How are charter schools held accountable? How does that happen?
Yeah. Charter schools are held accountable in a couple of unique ways. So I mentioned that charter school students, charter schools overall, they have to meet the same sort of standards, right? That every other public school has to meet in Texas. The kids have to take the STAR test or whatever test of the moment, right? They have to meet the same graduation requirements. All of that kind of stuff is exactly the same for charters and ISD schools. Charter schools, in addition, are held uniquely accountable because we have a law on the books in Texas that says if a charter school doesn't perform, either academically or financially, for 3 years in a row, it's closed down. And I think a lot of people associate the idea of closing down a school as like a bad thing or a scary thing. Hey, if a school isn't serving kids, if kids can't read in that building and they're not learning math, why should that school stay open, right? The job of a school is not to provide adults with employment, it is to teach children. And if we're not doing that, the school shouldn't be around, right? Those kids should be put in an environment where they will have where they will learn and have the skills that they need to be successful in the world after school. So there is a very high bar for charter performance in Texas. There's only one other state in the country that has a higher bar. It's Florida, and they have a two strikes law, which is really tough.
Yeah.
So imagine, right? Imagine for a charter school, you come into a community where the traditional school system has been failing those families for a long time. You've got 3 years to get it together, to get those kids up to snuff, reading on grade level, doing math on grade level, or you're done. That's it. So it's a high standard, but it's the right one, right? Kids deserve to be in an environment where they're going to learn. And the idea that we just like kick the can down the road and let schools stay open forever and ever when we know, like when we have a demonstrated track record that those schools are not serving kids is like so gross to me. As a mom, I can't even handle it. Like it's so wrong that, and so anyway, that is one of the ways that the state holds charter schools accountable. But another way that schools are held accountable, which we can't discount, is parents are not assigned to them. And if the school is not working, they leave. And that is not a bug, it is a feature. It is a
Yeah.
good thing for parents to have agency over the most important decision they can make for their kids. And that's the environment where they will spend the majority of their day, meet their friends, be in front of other adults who will model for them like professional adult behavior and appropriate behavior. And you want that environment to be the environment that is best for your kid. And the idea that parents can freely say, you know what, this is not working. It's not working for my kid. This is not where I want them to be. I'm going to find a different place is gives so much power to parents because schools, because they're funded on enrollment, you bet they're responsive to parent concerns and complaints. When something's not going right, it gets fixed because charters know we can't just keep going on and on forever in perpetuity without addressing this problem because nobody will enroll their kid.
Yeah. So that three strikes rule, does that start on year one, day one?
Day one,
So they
first day.
really got to pick up the slack right away.
Oh man. Okay, let me tell you a story. All
Please.
right. To the in order we could talk about the approval process for charters if you want to.
I do, but
I mentioned that it's very rigorous. It's very hard to get approved to start a charter school in Texas.
yeah.
The final step in the process is to have the State Board of Education, which is a group of elected, a body of elected people, approves applications that have gone through this very, very, very rigorous application process. Okay. 2 years ago, one new charter school in the entire state was approved. One in the
Wow.
entire state. One. Right. So it was a middle school in Fort Worth coming into one of the most underserved parts of town in Fort Worth. Um, very high poverty rates, very high crime rates, very low performance of the existing elementary schools. So an educational entrepreneur wants to bring a school in a middle school into this community. So think about what's happened for those kids. They've been in school already, right? From pre-K or kindergarten, whatever, through fifth grade.
Yeah.
All these kids have taken our state test already multiple times, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. So she starts her middle school in sixth grade. So I went and visited her. This is her first year open. So I went and visited her in September and I said, okay, you got 150 kids in the building. How many kids came in on grade level? All of these kids had taken the state test the previous school year.
Yeah.
How many out of 150 came in on grade level? Do you want to know how many?
Well, I mean, I kind of want to guess. Is it less than 10? Four?
Or,
Jeez. Wow.
or. So she's
Gosh.
got 3 years to get 146 kids who aren't performing on grade level in middle school ready for high school.
Yeah.
They're not even at elementary level. And she's got to get them ready for high school.
Jeez.
Tough
It's a task.
work.
Yeah,
Tough work,
for
right?
sure. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's hard.
I can
And
only
she,
imagine.
and she's up for it, right? And this, I feel like whenever I hear, and like, look, I mean, let's have honest talk here. The people who are like most grumpy ever about charter schools are like upper middle class white people,
Okay.
right? So,
Sure.
like, first of all, okay, like they're not like the vast majority of kids in Texas going to charter schools, they're not your kids, right?
Sure.
And like, why are you grumpy about someone coming into a neighborhood that you would never live in
Yeah.
and trying to fix a problem in schools that you would never put your kid in?
Yeah.
Like,
That's a good, I think it's a fair question.
what's up with that? I don't know. I don't get that, right? But that's just one example
Yeah.
of the crazy hard work that charter school entrepreneurs are like taking on, right? Like they are trying to solve a problem that the traditional system seems incapable of solving or unwilling in some cases to solve.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's a challenge either way you cut it. And in situations, especially like that up in Fort Worth, I think that's great that someone, had the gumption to try to go in there and fix that problem. It's obviously a major problem. If not for that community, certainly for the individual students and
Right,
families, like such a huge problem.
right, right.
Um, so what is the I mean, it's that fine. It's an arduous. It's a difficult process to get a charter school. So there's some, uh, you know, young guy in Austin wants to start that charter school that we were discussing earlier. Lots of outdoor time, lots of exercise every single day. Where does he even begin, or she? I don't know.
Yeah, great question. So the first, I'm going to give you the sort of Cliff's Note version of how a
Sure.
charter school comes to be. It takes about 2 years to get through the approval process in Texas. So you have an idea. The first stop for you is to fill out an application that, on average, a charter school application is about 500 pages long. So, most people who are
What?
starting a school from scratch in Texas spend about an entire year preparing their application for submission.
500 pages?
Yeah, you,
What?
yeah. This is what's so funny to me. I was having a meeting one time with this group of moms here in Austin who were asking me, like, trying to learn more about charters themselves and like just wanting to understand. And one said, well, I just feel like charters pop up everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, if only, if only a charter school could like pop up. Like the approval process that a school leader has to go through is totally insane here. So a 500-page application where they tell the state agency and the state board of education how they're going to comply with state education laws, federal education laws. What are they going to teach? What books are kids going to read? What curriculum are they going to use? How are they going to spend their time? How are kids going to get there? Who's going to be on their board? Who's going to run the school? I mean, they tell them everything. And the first step in that process is for a panel of blind, independent, external reviewers to review the application and say, is this school, like, has this school checked all the boxes, answered all of the questions? Are they going to be able to successfully run a school that is going to be true to the model or the idea, right, that the school leader has proposed, and do they have a sense of how they're going to carry that idea out throughout the course of a school year? So that's the first check. You got to make it through an external review panel of like blind independent reviewers. You have to meet a certain score on that part of the evaluation standard in order to move to the next step.
Yeah.
The next step from that place, so in an average year, only about 25% of the applications submitted to the state make it out of the external review process. So there's a
Gosh.
massive culling
Yeah.
in that first step. The next step is that for all of the experts and the department leaders at the Texas Education Agency, so this is the regulatory body that governs public schools, they evaluate your application, they score your application, and then you go in front of a panel of them for a day-long interview where they grill you on every single thing. And from that point, generally about, so we've got like about 25% of the applications have made it to that point. And from there, about another half of those applications get weeded out.
Yeah.
And then the commissioner of education evaluates the applications that have made it past the TEA capacity standard. And he says, or she,
Sure.
yes, this school would be a good addition to the array of public schools in that community, or no, right? And then we'll make recommendations that get forwarded for new charters that should be awarded. And those recommendations get forwarded to the State Board of Education, where the process starts all over again with capacity interviews, decision making, and utter and complete discretion on the State Board of Education's part. They could deny a school because they don't like the person who is going to lead it, or they could deny a school because, and this happens all the time, a State Board of Education member's personal friends with the leader of the ISD who where the school wants to locate. And they say, well, I mean, I don't want you to locate inside the Austin ISD boundaries. I like the Austin ISD superintendent. I don't want to do anything to offend them.
That's not
And so
good.
a school gets vetoed. So there's no standard at all for whether or not the state board approves or vetoes a recommended charter school application.
So bring flowers on that day.
Right. Right. Exactly. Bring flowers, dress sharp. All told, about 15% ultimately of the applicants who, in a sort of over like a 10-year horizon, about 15% of the applicants that have started the process have ultimately opened a school in Texas. So this is like, it is very hard. Last
Yeah.
year, for example, so I mentioned 2 years ago, one school was approved. Last year, two schools were approved. I mean, this is not like, 50 schools are getting approved every year. This is
Yeah.
a very methodical, difficult process for
Yeah.
a school to get through. And so the good news is, right, for taxpayers, from a taxpayer perspective, you can be sure that when a school comes out the other side of that process, like they're ready, right? They
Yeah.
are ready to open a school. They are ready to be accountable for taxpayer money. They are ready to serve kids because it is such a tough process. Somebody who is, just like got an idea, but doesn't have the ability to back it up into actually a performing public school is not going to get through that process.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the future of schools and also sort of y'all's priorities and I know the primaries are happening right now and, the Texas Ledge doesn't start again until, I don't know, around this time next year. So it's looking a little bit in the future, but sort of what y'all are thinking for the next, I think the 89th legislature. But before I ask that, I just because I don't know, this is where my mind is going when you're explaining all this stuff about how to start a charter school. This long process, 500 pages, and then you go through this committee and this committee, and then they could still deny you all this. I wonder. I imagine charter schools, you got to have a building, right? You have to have a location for someone to actually attend. It can't just be. I don't think it can be online. Maybe it can be online, but I mean, at what point does the entrepreneur that wants to start this charter school, do they say, okay, it's safe for me to find a location, right? It
Mm.
doesn't sound like it's safe to do that at the very beginning when I get the 500 pages. I got to do it sometime between after finishing that 500 pages and the final approval process. Or
Yeah.
do I need to have a location to get approved?
Oh man, this is one of the hardest things that schools have to deal with right now. With no one is going to sell them a building or sign a contract for them to have a mortgage on a building or to lease a building
Yeah,
if they don't have approval to open the school, right?
yeah,
So they can't pinpoint a location. And as real estate across the state has gotten so much more expensive in the last couple of years, like Land is more expensive. Building a building is more expensive. Buying an existing building is more expensive. Everything is so hard. And finding a location is one of the trickiest parts of the puzzle for our schools. From the time that a school is approved and the time that they open their doors, there's like a 1 school year lag, right?
Okay.
So State Board of Education approves schools in June and they open not August 2 months later, but 14 months later.
Yeah.
So we have that time period to find a location. But one of the things that's really hard for them is sometimes it takes, almost that entire time period to find a location. And in the meantime, they're trying to hire teachers. They're trying to,
Yeah.
meet families and recruit families to come to their school. So they're trying to like build a community without being able to tell people where they're going to be located.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to
Hey, come to
do.
my school. Where is it? I don't know yet.
Yeah, I don't know, but we hope it's going to be right by you. Yeah, it's really hard. It's a really, really tough, it is a really tough piece of the puzzle for schools. And I think that's one of the reasons, frankly, why, why, they're, it is a barrier to
Yeah.
entry for
Sure.
sure. Yeah,
Well, I think for is it my charter school or is it some I don't know whose charter
it's
school it
yours.
is, but for
It's
my
yours.
all I
Well,
need
it's
to
going to be ours because my kid's going to be
ours.
enrolled.
There we go.
Yeah,
Perfect. We just need to find a field
a
basically,
great
and
part.
with a
Yeah.
with a decent building, they'll be fine. Their kids. Um. So, what is the future of school? It's such a big topic nowadays, especially in Texas, and I wonder what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah.
It sounds
I
like charter schools have been trying to meet the future of school for a long time now.
Yeah, yeah. Charter schools have been around in Texas for 27 years, and uh, they one of the things that I think is amazing, right, about charters, and I mentioned at the very, very beginning that one of the things that charters are guaranteed or supposed to be guaranteed, right, in the sort of regulatory structure that governs public schools is the ability to innovate and be creative in order to meet parent demand and respond when there's new research that shows us how important it is for kids to be outside or whatever it is, right? This is like one of the fundamental characteristics of charters is that they're supposed to be guaranteed this autonomy in order to respond to changing conditions in the environment. And I think one of the things that we've seen, not just in the last 27 years since charters have been on the scene, but I would say really intensely in the last 5 to 10 years, the idea of school and what parents now today, what young parents want from school is like fundamentally different than what the baby boomer generation wanted for schools for their kids. I'm a Gen X person and the best
Well,
gen. And
mm, mm,
and and like what my mom and dad wanted out of school for me is very different than what parents want out of school today. I have a 6-year-old who is in a public school, and the expectation I think that parents have today is an expectation around fit for their kid. More and more families are using the ability to transfer within their own school district than ever before. We did that with
yeah.
our little girl. More and more families are looking at truly different kinds of school environments, not just school in a brick and mortar sense, but schools where there are so many in Austin, like Alpha, where and the Acton academies, and so truly different environments. The expectation that people have that kids will go to school 5 days a week from this time to this time, and the school bus will pick them up and it will take them to the place where all of the other kids in their neighborhood go to school. It's like really it's a very old-fashioned idea anymore. And parents just they don't think about school that way anymore. And
Yeah.
so the policy and regulatory framework that governs public schools needs to keep pace with that. And I think we get sort of on the policy side, and lawmakers get sort of like irrationally like locked into the idea of like protecting the thing that a whole lot of families don't really want anymore, right?
Yeah.
They want the ability to move around. Some we talk to families all the time who one kid goes to their assigned ISD school, one kid's going to a charter school, and the other kid's in a private school, right?
Yeah.
Like that is a normal situation for families now. That never, I mean, that would not happen in the 70s and 80s. Like
Yeah.
that didn't happen, right? And it happens a lot now where parents are really thinking about what is the right place for my individual kid. And I think that it is just incredibly important that Texas continue to think about and lawmakers continue to think about how do we make sure that parents have the avenue, like whatever barriers are in their way, goofy transfer policies at the district level, whatever it is, right? Like that we clear the path for families to have their freedom and flexibility to move around within the public education space for whatever public school is right for their kid.
Yeah.
And that, like setting aside the debate over, private school choice, vouchers, ESAs, whatever, right? Like there you can create an environment where families have lots of options inside the public system, including charter schools, but policies have to be evolved
Yeah.
in order to make that so. I don't know if you know this, but in Texas, I found this out a couple of years ago and it blew my mind.
Okay.
In Texas, if a student wants to transfer into another school district, like I live in Austin ISD boundaries. If let's say I wanted to send my kid to uh, an Eanes school in
Sure.
Westlake, right? I have permission to ask to transfer into the Eanes school district, and the Eanes school district has permission to charge me tuition. Did
What?
you know that?
Don't you? So do you get to keep your property taxes?
Nope. Yeah,
What?
I know. Isn't that wild? So I didn't know that. Texas is one of the only states in the country that allows this.
That
So
doesn't make
we
any sense.
see this fascinating situation where school districts are using their ability to charge tuition for transfer requests as a way to screen out kids that they don't want to come to their district.
Uh-oh.
Huh? Yeah,
Uh-oh.
it's super interesting, right? And so there was a bill last session that would have eliminated their ability to do that, right? If you have a transfer policy that says kids can request to come to your school district, you can't charge them tuition,
Yeah.
right? Because we know what happens, right? Families who can afford to pay the tuition are happy to pay the tuition, but
Sure.
a family who can't afford to pay the tuition isn't invited to come.
I don't know that I would be happy to pay the tuition if I could afford it. I'd already pay the property taxes. I would be very upset.
We're we're
But yeah, I
we're
get I
already
get I
paying
get it. Yeah.
already paying tuition, exactly. But so it's a screening mechanism that when you look at the school districts that use this policy, this tuitioning policy, they continue to be overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly upper middle class. And that is not the demographic of Texas and Texas school children, right? That's not what our
Yeah.
schools look like today.
Sure.
So there was a bill last session that would have eliminated the ability for school districts to charge tuition. That is a smart policy. That is the right thing to do for children. That is the right thing to do for kids, right?
Yeah.
Kids of all backgrounds deserve the ability to move around within the public education system to be in the school that will best serve them. And all of these artificial barriers that we create need to go, right?
Yeah.
And parents are aligned with that. And so I think when you think about the future of schools, I think we are going to see more moving around inside the system. One of the things that we also have to like just acknowledge and wrap our brain around is that we do not have as many children as we used to have
Yeah.
in this country, in this state, in urban areas. And schools are going to have to close. We have too many school buildings, right? That is just the reality.
Yeah.
almost every district in Texas is facing some kind of pressure, right? They have school in like fast growing suburban communities. They have schools in the wrong places, right? They've got lots of kids in a new part of town and not enough kids over here, whatever it is. We got too many school buildings.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to figure out how to rationally right size the number of buildings we have to match the number of kids that we have. That's going to be really hard. It's going to be politically painful. People are going to get real big mad about that. But it's going to have to happen, right? It's going to have to happen. And so I think the faster that we can just wrap our brain around the idea that like kids are going to be moving around inside the public education space, going to different kinds of campuses, choosing different schools than the ones that might be right next to their neighborhood, and that we just need to wrap our brain around like that's what parents want, that's what's going to happen, and it is good for kids and it's good for families. And so the more we can clear the space to allow parents maximum flexibility to move around inside inside public education, the better off we're going to be. And schools are going to get better. We have evidence of that already with charter schools. We see that over time, school districts, ISDs that have charter schools inside of their attendance zones, do they perform better? They're getting better faster than school districts that don't have charter schools inside their attendance zones. I mean, it's not
Is that
theoretical, right? Like the more parents have the ability to move around, the better all of our schools get. District schools get better, charter schools get better, everybody gets better, and kids are better served.
is that a function of just having the competition where a school might lose a student to a charter school so they have to work harder, or is it could it also be, and I mean, both can be true, right? That the charter school maybe specializes in, helping those those children that have fallen behind, right?
Mhm.
And so they go there, and so the public school doesn't have that child that's already behind anymore, so their scores go up. The average automatically goes up. A little bit of both.
Everybody benefits when kids are in the right environment for them. Everyone.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And as far as the school buildings go, I think we already established that a lot of charter schools need buildings, so that'll be perfect.
Yeah, well,
So
you want to talk about making people big mad? Talk to ISD supporters about making them give their empty buildings to charters. Woo wee. Yeah.
well, I mean, what else would they do with them? I mean, save us some
Oh,
money on property taxes, right?
yeah.
No, I don't know. Maybe that's not their priority. So final question. I appreciate you taking, spending this time with me today. It's been really enlightening, and it's fascinating. So, what are the important policy issues for y'all's organization coming up in 2025?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure many folks will know that the idea of a school funding increase last legislative session was sort of tied with this idea of the passage of a private school choice program.
Yeah,
And because the private school choice program did not happen, a school funding increase also did not happen. Charter schools are public schools. We would love to see some of the state's incredible riches and resources that we are sitting on right now be directed into the public school system, not just for charters, of course, but for all public schools.
sure.
So we of course will be working on that. We'll be working specifically on helping charter schools get access to more funding for buildings, because that is a big challenge for us.
Yeah,
Um, but when I look at our legislative priorities for coming into the next legislative session, I will say that you can kind of bucket them into this sort of idea of preserving flexibility and the ability to be unique and creative. It is one thing to demand that charter schools, meet very high standards, which we embrace fully at both in the charter community and at the charter school association. But it is another thing to micromanage schools so deeply to the point that they lose all ability to pivot when they need to and to be creative. And one of the things that we're seeing Over time, as happens, more and more red tape, more and more rules and requirements. And this is not just for charters, but for ISDs too. And I think it's starting to make teachers feel extremely constrained in the classroom. It makes administrators feel constrained because they can't give teachers the flexibility that they need. And
Yeah.
so we're looking at a number of policies that would just roll back some of the micromanagement that we feel like the state is engaged in right now in the classroom. That is not in any way a weakening of any of the standards or any of the new policies that have been put in place over the last couple of years, some of which have been incredibly good policy, like the requirement for teachers of younger grades to go through new training on reading instruction to make sure that teachers are using phonics-based reading instruction. That was incredibly smart policy, and we are seeing already that that is helping more children learn to read.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not talking about stuff like that. Like that's the right. If the state's going to
Sure.
micromanage schools, that's the right way to micromanage. But other things around like how many minutes you have to spend on this and how many minutes you have to spend on that, and all the state standards are like just grow and grow and grow every year, and it just takes away all of the freedom and flexibility for schools to create an instructional program that is unique. And so we're looking at preserving creativity.
That's great. That's really cool. I might make a suggestion that even if it's just reducing the font size, 500 pages is a lot. Maybe reduce that a little bit. I don't know. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
possible.
yeah. We've got the Texas Education Agency sets the standards
Yeah.
for what the application process looks like for new charter schools, and I think they're starting to agree that that maybe having an application focus on minutia is not necessarily going to yield the best applicant pool. Like, are we creating a barrier to entry for somebody who does have a really incredible idea for a new school, but that they look at that application and think, whatever, I'm not filling that application out, I'll just start a private school instead,
Yeah,
right?
for
So
sure.
how do we create the balance between being accountable for taxpayer money and also making sure that people can be creative?
Yeah. You want to be rigorous, but you also want to be approachable. That makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Starlee Coleman, the CEO of Texas Public Charter Schools Association, I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you have a website or social media that you'd like to plug?
We do. Our website is txcharterschools.org. And I'll tell you, the most visited tab on our website is Find a Charter School. So if you are curious about charter schools in your neighborhood, or you want to see what schools might be already in your community, we encourage you to come to the website and check it out. You might find a school that you didn't even know was there.
I will probably find a school that I didn't know was there. I'll do that right now. Well, Starlee Coleman, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Have a great day.